Okay gang, I made a previous video in this car where I removed all the suspension parts, or at least the upper control arm and the springs and the spindles and everything. And I have all the new parts to go in place, so I'm going to go through the steps of what I'm going to do to change these out. Now you can see, you know, the rubber boot and stuff, and I don't know the real condition of the ball joints, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'm just going to replace the whole assembly. And with that, I'll need to take these bolts out of the lower control arm. I have bushings for the strut rod. I don't know if you can see the condition of these, but they are split. So I have a set of urethane bushings to go in there. I have new sway bar end links. I have new sway bar bushings, factory style. I didn't go with anything crazy on this. And of course I have new upper control arm and everything else, and I'll show you that real quick. There's all the pieces, parts. Nice stuff. I went with new parts rather than trying to replace individual pieces like the ball joints or the pivot arms on the upper control arms. Just makes more sense. This stuff isn't expensive, and it'd be a lot easier just to swap them out. I also have my disc brake kit from CSRP. So I'm going to get to work on this, and first thing I'm probably going to do is pull the strut rod, but I'm going to pull the bushings off of that end first. And just for my purposes, I'm going to get a measurement of where this is positioned right now. I'll just pick a spot, like maybe torque box, something like that. And that way, whenever I do that, I can get a measurement from torque box to the control arm. And when I reset everything, I can put it back to that position. And I know I'm gonna get an alignment done anyway, but that'll at least get me close to where it should have been, or what should be the correct spot. So with removing that strut rod, you'll find that it's got two nuts. It's got a castellated nut with a cotter pin, and then that's 7/8, and then it's got a 1-inch nut further in. And you can see maybe see the staggered threads on the strut rod. Now, I'd recommend taking the nuts off of the strut rod first before tackling the mounts on the control arm. Simple physics, you take those off and this rod is going to want to spin as you're working on it. At least while it's attached here, you've got something holding it steady. And the next thing is I'm going to take these 3/4 inch head bolts out, and these had cotter pins. Again, I don't know if you can really see it or not, but there was cotter pins down here. Ford likes to use cotter pins, as most of them did back in the 60s. So I'll get that out of the way, and there's the strut rod. Now this will take a little cleaning up, but no need to buy a new one. And just a note here, the bolts that hold it to the control arm, they're splined. So the nuts will come off pretty easily, or they should. And then take a brass mallet and tap on the bottom of these, and that'll separate them out of the control arm. And then you can reuse them. Now of course I'll clean this up and get some paint on it before it goes back in. And I've removed the sway bar end links. And this is one nice thing about most Georgia cars, stuff isn't rusted to pieces. And I could actually reuse this if I wanted to, but I have a whole new kit for that. The head of it was a 9/16, and the nut is a 1/2 inch. I've already removed the end links on both sides of the sway bar, and then I'm going to remove the bolts that hold the bushings in place, and those are 9/16 at the head and the nut. Alright, with both the strut rods out, the only thing really left to remove is the control arms. And as you can see, there's a concentric washer attached to the bolt. What that does is it adjusts your in and out, let's say, on your lower control arm. So if that concentric is turned and the bolt travels that direction, then it pushes the control arm out. If it's turned this direction, it pulls the control arm in. Now this is done at the alignment shop. However, I'm going to make note of how that one's positioned on the passenger side, and again how that one's positioned on the driver's side. There you can see the difference. So that way when I put it back together, I at least have it somewhat close to where it was before. And I'll remove the nut from that, because you can't turn that bolt head. You have to turn the nut on the other side, and that's a 3/4. So I'll get that out of the way, pull that bolt, and the control arms will come out. And maybe that'll help you see what I'm talking about. See, that slot is what that bolt rides on. And as you can see, the nut, the washer on the other side is designed to fit specifically on the bolt so that it mirrors what that front section does. Hope that makes sense to you. Pretty simple, but pretty efficient design as well. Well, as I'm cleaning up the old rusty stuff, I'm also repainting the parts that I just got, the new control arms and everything else, because I don't really know the quality of what's on there. But I wanted to show you something. This part, I haven't done anything to it yet. It looks good, and it's probably fine, but it's got a big bare metal spot on this lower plate, so it needs paint regardless. And also the bushing is bare metal, and like I said, they look pretty good. This one I just repainted, and it turned out really nice. Here's the strut rod, and also one of the spring mounts, or lower bucket, whatever you want to call it. This is the one that, this is what it looks like out of the package, and this is after I threw some paint on it. Now the reason I'm bringing this up is because I was at Harbor Freight the other day, and this is what I picked up: iron armor, chassis, and grill paint. So it wasn't that expensive, and from what I'm seeing right now, I'm pretty impressed by it. It flows really nice, leaves a nice finish. Here's the upper control arm that I painted. I'm pretty happy with that, and I may have to go back to the store and get some more of this stuff. Alright, I wanted to show you this. This is the bushing kit right here for the strut rod. That's the new kit, and here's the old bushing setup, and you can see these things are pretty shot. The difference between the two is this one has a split sleeve, whereas this one had a one-piece sleeve. And what I mean by that, the internal sleeve ran the full length, and when they assembled this, it had a little flange on one end, and it had a bigger flange with a holding a washer on this end. So that was on, and then this is what's left of part of the ring that held that together, and it was on there. So when this was put in the car, they put the bushings on, and I'm sure some sort of press came along and pushed this short flange over to catch it. You can barely see there how much is holding that. So I didn't know how it was put together. I ended up just cutting off the one end, and when I do the other one, I'll cut off the smaller flange and make it a lot easier. But the new bushings nicely come with this side to front, so that'll go in the front half, obviously, and this will go in the back half. Pretty nice, and a lot easier to change out than the originals. And things are looking better and better. Upper control arm is in place, and that's just a matter of installing the bolts through the shock tower. And there's the lower control arm concentric bolt that I installed. Now the lower control arm takes a little more effort to get in. You kind of have to wiggle it to get it to go in between. That's a snug fit, and you may have to tap it. I had to tap this one up from the bottom with a rubber mallet just to get it in position. And then my strut rod, of course, I've got my new bushings in place, and with that I had to adjust the length a little bit. I had a witness of where the nut on this end was, but with the old rubber bushings being all worn out, that would not work anymore, because the new bushing is now solid and fatter, so that would really push it back a little bit. So I had to take the nut and thread it this direction so that I can move the strut rod that direction to get my placement correct on my length here. I think it's looking good, and the next thing I'm going to do is install the new spindle that came out of the kit from CSRP, and of course I painted it. This old weight bench that I'm not using anymore comes in real handy as a paint rack. I may have to keep it, I don't know, but I'll get that in place and go from there. And I will go into more detail whenever I get actually installing the rotors and all those pieces. Well, I've got everything in place. I got the little cup or bucket for the spring. I cut off half of a coil, and I'm hoping that drops the car, even if it's just half an inch to an inch. I think it'll be fine. I just wanted to drop it a little bit. I have my coil spring compressor in, and I'm getting ready to release that, and that should wrap up most of the passenger side, other than putting the shocks on. And I had to order the shocks from the parts store, so they'll be here tomorrow. So I know I didn't show you on the other side of how I put the spring in, but I'm going to show you on this side. Now this is a really nice spring compressor I borrowed from a buddy of mine. I'm not sure who makes it, but it's a pretty handy kit. It's even I showed it in my earlier video when I took these out. It's got a bearing here, nice long threaded shaft, and these plates. And there's two different sizes of plates, and just a really convenient spring compressor. And of course I've got everything bolted in place. I've got the little spring bucket or pocket or bracket, whatever you want to call it. What I'm going to do is insert the coil spring up in, get it centered up on top, and then get that coil set, because there's a stop on the bucket on the back side. Now as you can see, I've already got my spindle in place on the lower control arm, and that's going to go down as I pull the upper control arm up. So while I do that, I'll push that down, mate the two together, and get a nut on there. Now it's in place, but what I'm going to do beyond that is I'll put a jack underneath it. I want to put tension on those springs, on the spring, and that'll hold everything in place while I take the spring compressor back out. So hope that makes sense, and I hope you find that handy. Well, this will be the end of this video. The only thing I have left to do is put the shocks on, but at this point I can't, because I can't jack up the suspension far enough, because, well, there's not enough weight on the car. So that'll come later. I also need to install the sway bar, but again, I'm waiting on that as well. I've got it cleaned up and ready to go, but I have an issue with the bushings. The ones that I bought are too small for the size of the sway bar, so I'm gonna have to get some new ones. But other than that, that'll be the end of this video, and the next one I'm gonna install the rest of, or at least the enough parts of the CSRP brake system so that I can put the wheels on. I'm not going to install the booster and everything right now. I'm just going to put the rotors and calipers and all that stuff on. Okay gang, as I make progress on the 68 Mustang, I mentioned that I was going to convert it to disc brakes. And I've also mentioned this company, CSRP. It's one of their boxes. And when I ordered this kit, I got 3 boxes, and all of this stuff was in them. And here's some information for you. There's CSRP, discbrakeswap.com, some phone numbers and fax numbers, and this basically tells you what's in each one of the boxes. So this kit is pretty complete. I'll go through the parts that I have here. I've got a set of brake hoses, a pair of calipers, caliper mount brackets, I'm sorry. There's a pair of dust shields with the hardware to install them, a pair of slotted rotors, some single piston calipers, and again, I'm not building a hot rod or sports car. I'm building a nice easy car to drive, so I'm not going crazy on it. There's a set of wear silver brake pads, which I may upgrade to a better brand or better grade of brake pad. There's these brackets here, and I'm not exactly sure what they do, but I'll figure that out when I get to that point. There's a new set of wheel bearings and dust gaskets or seals. Some thread locker. Of course, your hardware kit, all the stuff you should need. There's a set of outer tie rod ends, a proportioning valve, because I think it's designed to retrofit into your original metering block. So that'll take care of metering the brakes, because I'm leaving drum brakes on the back. And here is, there's some brake lines in here, some hard lines, and this is also for the vacuum on the booster. Comes with a nice brake pedal, even has a disc brake pad on it, and a brake booster. Now I'm not going to install the booster and the pedal and all that stuff just yet, because I don't even have the engine in it, none of that stuff. My goal is to get it on the ground, so I'm going to be installing the rotors, the brackets, dust shields, maybe the rubber lines, and of course the calipers and associated parts that goes with those. So I'll go through those steps. Okay, I've opened up some of the packaging, and the calipers are boxed 4012 and 4013, and I believe according to that the 4012 is the right side and 4013 is the left side. Along with that, you've got brackets. Now these brackets are not really labeled, and I may have lost the instructions. I've had this kit for over a year, but that's not to say I didn't open it up, or if I got the instructions separate and misplaced them, I don't know. But I'm pretty technically savvy. I think I can figure this out. So the two brackets mount up, and if you look at it, I think it's pretty self-explanatory. You've got a big fat boss up here at an angle, and then you've got another boss down low. And if you look at it, this one has this is all flush right here. That those two faces are flush, and on this side you've got this big lump. So you're not going to put that big lump against the mating surface. So let me switch hands. This will fit like that. It'll mount to that location and then mount down there to the lower hole, and that'll take care of the caliper brackets. Okay, so I have the brackets mounted, and I'm going through my pieces and parts, and I find there's 4 rubber kind of bushing things, and what I'm going to, I feel safely assume, is that that's where the caliper bolt rides in. So with that, they're going to go in these holes right here, these big holes on the bracket itself, and I'll have to pull that through with 2 hands, but that's where that's going to go. And then the bolt, I'll put a little grease in there when I put the caliper itself on. Now with the wheel bearings, they were nice enough to send some high temp wheel bearing grease, and I'm going to use that. There's other ways to pack wheel bearings, and this is one of the tools. And basically you would put your wheel bearing inside of this. You see the grease residue there. You would close this down and then use a grease gun on the Zerk fitting and just pump it and pack the bearings. But since they provided me with some grease, I'm going to use it, and I'll just do a real quick demonstration of how you pack wheel bearings. You're going to get some grease, put it in the palm of your glove. Don't do it with your hands, because you don't want this stuff in your body. And you're going to slowly just kind of cup it through. And you keep doing that all the way around as you rotate it. And what that does is it forces the grease up into the bearing area. And you go around it several times, and you'll do it from the top side and the bottom side, or the front and the back, however you want to look at it. And you're using your hand as a press, let's say. You scrape that in, pack it in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pack all 4 of these wheel bearings so that I can install the rotors. And I'll do more of that in just a minute. Okay, so I've installed the wheel bearing. The inner wheel bearing is slightly larger than the outer wheel bearing, and the race, which is what the wheel bearing actually rides on, is already installed. So that's in place, and then I'm going to put the seal on. And these seals can be a little tricky sometimes. I've seen people use a block of wood and, you know, hit them square, try to hit them square. This I'm using a little body hammer, and you just got to catch it just right and get it to pinch into the opening. It might take you a few tries too, because the paint gets in the way. You can hear it when it's seated. Makes a different sound. But there's the seal, and of course the bearing, it can still move in there until it gets seated onto the spindle itself. Okay, I have the bracket on, and now I need to put the dust shield on. Put your little gasket on first, and then your dust shield has a cutout on the bottom, and that's for clearance of the lower control arm. So you line that up. It also gives clearance where the caliper goes, and this little piece here goes on top. It's kind of like a deflector, maybe to protect your inner wheel bearing a little bit. That only fits one way. And then get your bolts in, tighten those up. Okay, so now I'm going to install the rotor onto the spindle. So line it up, slide it on, and then I've got the outer wheel bearing, which is already greased up. Put that in place. And then there's a retainer washer with a tab on it. That goes one direction. And then the main nut. Now normally when I do these, I just use a pair of channel locks or vice grips, and it's kind of a feel thing. You can rotate it, and you can adjust the nut as you go. And I've been doing this for years this way, and basically, you know, you got to find that happy spot where it turns nice and easy, but it's not wobbling, and that's usually your stop point. And you may go back and forth a few times with the tightening of it. You can feel it get kind of a little bit of a bind if you go too far. You don't want to do that. So once you get it where you want it, you get it the castellated shield nut thing, and then a cotter pin, and it should fit right through there and lock it in. And that should take care of the rotor, other than putting on the dust cap, and you just tap that on with the rubber mallet. Okay, I'm going to show you the caliper. Now these pads that came with the kit, they are Wherever Silvers. They sell them at Advance, and I thought I'd upgrade and get, you know, a better grade, like a gold or even ceramics if they were available. But apparently this is all they sell, and that's fine, it'll work. But these calipers and this setup is the same from 68 to 73, and what you can see there's got a little tab, and that lines up with a notch on the caliper. Now the weird part to me was this hole right here. The kit comes with these pins, and it's got a little groove cut in it, and the idea is it goes in that hole, and then the spring clip. And it's a little tricky to do. I did the passenger side already, but basically you have to push this over, get it over the pin, and what I did is I took the main bolt, stuck it in the hole of the pad, and while that's in place, I used my other hand to push that down, and I don't know if I can do this on camera or not, but it's a little tricky to do that, and you end up with having two of those clips on the outside. And I'll get this on there and then I'll show you what I'm talking about. And there's how it should look. So now I'm going to work on getting the inner pad installed on the rotor, and I'll show you that in just a minute. Okay, earlier I think I had shown where I'd installed these rubber plugs. There's one up on top and one at the bottom, and that's where the retaining bolt for the caliper actually rides in. Now I thought I'd be further ahead to put these on, but that didn't work because I can't get the pad in without destroying the little plug. So I've already pulled one of the plugs back out, and I'm going to pull the other one out, and then I'll show you more of what I'm talking about. Okay, so I have both the plugs out, and I was mocking up the pad, and I noticed right out of the box the pad fits a little too snug in my opinion. Kind of have to knock it in there. I don't like that. So what I did was I ground down the end of the pad just a little bit, and that allows it to fit in easier and eventually be able to come back out if I need to when I do maintenance. So now that that's in place, and it may not even hurt to put a little grease on there, I may do that still, then these two plugs would go into these holes up here. Okay, I'm going to put the caliper on, and the caliper, it comes with this little shield, and it would slip around where the hose fitting goes, and it's bolted on with the bolts that hold the caliper in place. And there's a second set of bolts that are on the bracket assembly. Now this is raw, this is how it came out of the package, but I painted mine, and I'll slip that on, slip that over, and then I'll install the bolts. Now again, I'm going to put a little bit of grease on these bolts. I just haven't done it yet. Okay, those two bolts are in place. They're not tight yet. I just snugged them up a little bit. And then there's two more bolts. These are 14 millimeter, and these two are 13 millimeter. And you can see I've got one in down here at the bottom, front edge of this bracket, which would be this location. And I'm going to put this one in up above and tighten those up. Now with that in the bracket in place, of course the caliper in place, there's two little holes up here, and that's what this clip does. It'll clip into that and go on top of the pad itself, and then it gets a bolt in it. And that holds that pad from moving around. And then I'll tighten that bolt up as well. And that one is actually a 3/8. So there's one on top, and then there's a second one that goes on the lower part of the pad, or the opposite end of the pad I should say. And there you have, caliper mounted, all the clips and fasteners in place. Hope that makes sense to you. This will probably be the end of this video, mainly because I don't need to have everything else hooked up yet, and I'll make a second part whenever I connect the rubber lines and the hard lines and all that sort of thing. But it's a different system. Obviously the new stuff is quite a bit simpler, but this worked, and I'm sure it'll work fine on this car. Hey gang, it is October 6th, 2016, and it's a beautiful day in Georgia, and I'm trying to make a little progress on the 68 Mustang project. In my previous video I showed how I installed the power steering kit, and I'm moving on from that point. Now this car I've also done floor pans, torque boxes, the front sheet metal apron, and core support, and I've installed all new suspension on the front of this car. And of course with the power steering I put in all new tie rods and cleaned up everything under the hood, and you can see all that. So previously I've installed the new rotors, spindles, calipers, all that sort of thing, and this is really a continuation of that. The kit that I'm using is from CSRP, and you can see on the box it's upside down, but 67 power brakes, automatic transmission, based on their kit design. I'm also using classic tube, and this I picked up from Mustangs Unlimited. So since I have all the other stuff installed, what I'm working on is installing the brake booster, the master cylinder, the rubber lines, brake pedal, and combination valve that I picked up also from Mustangs Unlimited, or proportioning valve, however you want to label it. So with all that in mind, I'll go through a couple things. One, the brake pedal. This comes in the kit and you need to use it. It has just a bolt up at the top. You're going to take that bolt out, pull the brake pedal out, reinstall this one, and that'll take care of that. The booster I'll get to later, but for right now what I'm dealing with is I want to connect the rubber hoses, and these are a little bit different than what came on the car, and I'll show you what I'm talking about. On the original setup, if you can see this, it had this little bracket, and this is loose right now, but that bracket was turned like that, and the original brake line actually came in and made a loop and came back into that. It didn't come straight out like this one. So with this kit, you have to take this bracket off, and that's just a 1/2-inch bolt, and that comes right out. So let me show you what I'm dealing with. Beyond that, the new line, it has to go in like this, and you can see the bracket is different from side to side. So this one has the opening faces back, and there's 2 holes there on the frame rail where they actually line up. And so what I'll do is I'll bolt that on and then thread in the line. The only problem is, between these 2 different kits, this new line is too small for that end. So what I had to do, I went to Advanced Auto Parts and I picked up these adapters. And there's one was a Dorman, and there you can see the part number, and these things are pretty cheap. And then the other one was this BLF 22C, and basically it adapts the 2 lines, or one into the other. So what will happen is I will thread the adapter in and make that tight, and then I will thread that into this, and that'll take care of any problems I have with those lines. And now, you know, what I can do is I can judge my location a little better. If I need to move or bend the line that I have some room in the back. I'll show you that. I can bend this line a little bit aft if I need to. It's very soft. It'll bend really easy, and I can just adapt until I get the holes to line up on the bracket. Once I get all that in place, then I will move on to attaching to the caliper itself. This rubber plug right here comes out, and then I will rotate this to line up with that. Now you can see this thing has a kind of a taper to it, so it's only going to really fit one way, and you have to play with it a little bit, but it should line up on that boss, and put the bolt in. Now it's going to take a banjo bolt. Let me get that and I'll show it to you. Okay, I have it in place right now, but I'm going to show you, this is the one for the driver's side. And basically you have this bolt, there's a little hole in it, and it goes all the way through the center, and you put on your crush washer. You have to have those, one on either side, and then you thread that into the master cylinder. Now if you look close, this one, it's at a slight angle, and that's because there's a cutaway on the edge of this fitting. And I'll show you on the other one. You can see it right there, that cutaway, and that appears to be the way you need it, so that it lines up, and then once the bracket's in place, everything should work out fine. So that I'll do that on both sides, and that'll take care of the rubber lines. And of course I still have to do a clamp. I'll go around here. There's a bolt right there that holds the hard line up against the frame rail. And then inside the engine bay, there'll be another one over here where I have this tape to line up with that bolt. And it's going to take a little bit of fitting to get everything squared away until I get the master cylinder and combination valve or proportioning valve in place. Okay, so I have both sides in. Everything bolted up nice as far as that goes. But I think I'm going to have to do some modifications, let's say. What I found was this kit, this hardline kit, was designed to go with the old metering block that came originally on the car. And I believe this car may be an early production 68, technically, you know, like a late 67, so there may be some anomalies between the two. And with that, I'm going to have to do some modifications because these lines are designed to go like into the metering, the factory style metering block from what I can see. Also, the size of these fittings are too large to go into the proportioning valve. This little size right here, which is a 3/8 bolt head or whatever, fits in those, and those are much bigger. So I may have to come up with some adapters to make those lines fit into these prospective locations. Also, the rear fitting, which is down here on the floor, you can see it's got a red fitting on it. It's too small to fit into this one. So there's a couple of things that are going to throw me off here, but what I'll do is I'll find adapters to make all this stuff fit. Okay, besides all the dogs barking, I wanted to show you something that I think is interesting. Earlier I talked about using the original pin in this controller, in this brake pedal arm. That won't work. You do have to use this bolt, and the bolt is a slightly smaller diameter, but the reason you have to use it, I'll show you this picture that I found on the internet on my phone, is that little hole to the right is where the brake pedal has to go. So it's technically, if you were to turn it, above the original hole and slightly forward. So that explains a few things. One, you know, the difference in length, but then, you know, if you compare where the throw arm or the rod would come off of the booster assembly, you know, if you had it down here, that rod would not work. It just wouldn't line up. But if you line this up with the original hole in the firewall, then that tells you this has to go higher. So that's why you have this bolt, and it should fit the hole that's in the car. I've already looked. It's very hard to show you from inside the car, but I wanted to make sure I showed you outside the car so you know what's going on, and I'm going to try to get this in place. Well, I'm going to try to show you. I'm coming in the passenger side of the car, and I'm going to try to show you where this bolt is. Now, see if I can get the angle right. There you can just see the hole where the old brake pedal mounted, and I have the bolt hanging up there. There you can see it in the upper hole, and it appears you have to go from the passenger side to the driver's side, or from right to left, because the cowl is in the way on the other side. So it would be really handy to have a couple of extra sets of hands to hold the light and hold the pedal and then put the bolt through. So I'm going to have to fight with that a little bit and see if I can't get it together. Just thought I'd show you where it goes though. Okay, so I'm all about sharing information, and I want to share something with you. In order to get that pedal assembly in, I had to take the plate loose that holds the assembly. It's kind of the horseshoe shape, and also that holds the bottom of the steering column up against the bottom of the dash. But to take that plate loose, there's two bolts, 9/16. They go through these two holes. You can see with witness mark where I'd painted them. So those had to come out, and then from the inside there's two self-tappers. There's one here and one over here, and I think those were put in during assembly at the factory to hold that plate in place until you got everything else in place, the steering column and the master cylinder. So I had to do all that because this plate assembly, you have to pull it down slightly, and the reason for that is the bolt that holds this assembly in. And as I said earlier, you have to go from passenger side to driver's side. There's a flange that interferes with it, and it is what holds the windshield wiper motor. And you either have to take that assembly out of the way, or you do what I did and take everything loose, and you can get the bolt started, but then it'll interfere. But you can pull down on that plate slightly and push it through. Now, I've had this pedal in 3 times now, or maybe this is the 3rd time. And the reason for that is it was binding. I had it all in place. I didn't even have tension on the bolt yet, and it was binding. I would try to make it do its throw, and I could feel it kind of catch. I couldn't figure out what it was, so I took it out, looked at everything, thought there were some burrs on the inside of this interfering, so I cleaned up the inside a little bit. That wasn't the answer. And then I started looking a little harder, and on the inside of the bracket assembly where the bolt goes through, there was a little bit of a flange, and I thought, well, maybe that flange was interfering. So I smoothed that flange off. That wasn't it either. Then I took a closer look at the pedal. Yeah, see that bare metal? This is hitting the top of the assembly. So basically, I'm going to take a sanding disc and grinder and knock down this corner here, give it a better radius. It looks like they tried to do it when they built this thing, but they didn't do it good enough. That's what was binding. So just a note, something to pay attention to, and if you have that problem, take a look at that point, see if that doesn't fix it. Lesson learned. Okay, I finally got the brake pedal in, and I found it grinding off the top, or I showed you that rub spot. That took care of any conflict or interference fit. So I got everything in, and then I started mounting the master cylinder. I mean the brake booster, sorry. And what I found is these holes in the plate that mount to the firewall, they're pretty snug. There's very little room for play, and so I had to unbolt the booster. I've already attached it to the brake pedal, by the way, but I've unbolted the booster so I get a little more room for my hands to get back in there. So just a note, you may want to disassemble this, take the booster off, mount the plate, and then connect it to the brake pedal. I'm not going to take it back off the brake pedal because it was quite a struggle to get that all in place. There's not a lot of room to operate under the dash, and also here in the firewall it's pretty tight. So I've got all 4 bolts started in the plate. I'm going to snug those down, and then I'll remount the brake booster to the plate. Okay, so I'm running into some problems. I think I talked before about I'm having a little difficulty with the hard lines because they're all different sizes, and I'm adding in that valve, the block. But I've run into a bigger problem, and I did not expect this. This booster assembly mounts to this bracket, which mounts to the firewall, and then of course the master cylinder mounts to the booster. Problem is, there's no room. Even if I line this up, hold my mouth right, nothing happens. There's no room. I cannot make this fit. Okay, so I think I've come up with a solution, or at least one that'll work for me without spending any more money, but spending some time, and allows me to do some creative thinking. So I've removed the bracket and of course the booster, and I've got them sitting over here on this temporary bench. Now, I said I could either replace what was there with another type of booster, or I could modify what I have. So I need about 1/2 inch. Basically, I need to get this booster back at least 1/2 inch. Well, you can see I've got probably, I don't know, 1.5 inches of space between here. This is the bracket. I also, when I consider moving the booster back, I've got to move the throw rod. It has to be shortened about 1/2 inch, because if you move the booster back, it's going to throw the pedal way off. Well, that's simple enough. This has enough length here and enough depth here that I can cut off probably a good 1/2 inch, and make this shorter. I'll have to cut a little bit, maybe a 1/4 inch or so off of this, so that there's enough length, or lack of length, let's say, to move this in, and that'll shorten up the throw on the pedal. Now, the other part of that is I've got this assembly, this bracket. Well, this is a nice bracket. You can see it's kind of funky with the bolts and everything, and this picks up the factory holes on the firewall. Well, my plan here is I'm going to shorten this a good half, maybe 3/4 of an inch. That's easy enough. I can do that without even hardly trying. But the difficulty is this calls out for bolts to go inside here. So if you can imagine, grab a bolt. If I shorten this up a half, whatever it is, I can't get the bolt in. You can see the difference there. I can't drop that into the hole. So I'm going to modify this bracket. Besides shortening it, I'm going to put a hole big enough for the bolt to go through right there. And I'll line it up so that I can just go straight in with a socket, and I don't have to fight with a wrench. Same thing over here, this hole. I'd have to do the same thing, and I'll just make a hole there. It's not going to hurt anything. The plate's not going anywhere. It's, you know, structurally sound. All of your force is fore and aft on this length. So that'll be simple enough, I think. So that'll collapse this, and I'll be able to put a bolt in that location, and that should take care of the problem. I actually talked to the owner of this stuff, or the maker, seller, let's say, and as we were talking, I said, yeah, I had a hard time getting these bolts in these holes. He said, yeah, that one's kind of hard. Well, if you know that, fix it. You can see here the witness mark. This puts the bolt up in that direction. This puts the bolt away in that direction, and it's hard to tell. This one, there's actually worn away paint on the inside from where the bolt is rubbing. Well, it's a nice good sized hole, but you know, this should be a manufacturing repair. The home builder shouldn't have to modify your bracket to make these things work, and it's a matter of a simple modification on, you know, when these are made. You just move the hole over on the design. Pretty simple. But anyway, that's the plan. Shorten this thing up, shorten up this arm here, and I think that'll give me all the clearance I need. So stay tuned, and hopefully I can get this together soon. Okay, here's what I've come up with so far. I made those holes, and then I oversized them so that a socket will fit, and also the bolt will fit. So that'll take care of my bolt hole to firewall problem. And then I determined I'm going to go with just a little more than a half an inch of spacing. So what I did is I took a 6-inch scale, which measures out about a ½ inch wide, or should be right at a ½ inch wide, and I drew a pair of parallel lines on each leg of this brace. And I've already started. I've cut off the first one here. So cutting the line off, I ended up with about 6/10, which is fine. That's going to be really close to what I need overall. It works out to be 580, and I think that'll be just fine. Now, what I'll end up doing is cutting off these other two legs, and then I will put this thing together. And you can see this thing wasn't built very accurately. It's even got a slight angle here, and I measured this distance all the way around, and it's off, but that's not a big deal because there's enough play in the swing arm of the booster that it's not going to matter. But what I'll end up doing is cutting out these other two sections here, and then putting this together, and I'll tack it together so it's not permanent, and then I'll be able to bolt this on and bolt the booster on without the rod, and see if everything lines up, put the master cylinder on, and I think that'll take care of it. Stand by. Okay, there it is, shortened up, and it's just tack welded together at this point, but it is bolted in place as it's supposed to be. The holes I made lined up just right, so the bolts are in the bottom, and the top I had to use a wrench on this one because there's a little bit in the way, and the socket there. So let me get the booster in place, and we'll see what happens. I dare say booyah. I got the booster on. There's just enough room I can get my fingers back there and start those the nuts on the back side, so that won't be a problem. And look at that, I've got just enough clearance. I was able to mount the booster mount the booster and then kind of wiggle the master cylinder in place. And it might even work if I had the master cylinder bolted straight to the booster. Now at this point I'm going to take everything back apart, finish welding the bracket all the way around, make sure it's good and solid, and then I will shorten up the rod on the back of the booster. Yeah, this makes me feel a lot better. I'm happy with that. Okay, so as I said before, I was going to shorten up some things, and this is the looped end that is going to connect onto the shaft on the back side of the booster. And I trimmed this down probably overall about a ½ inch, made 2 cuts and shortened it up. And then I also shortened up about the same length off the threaded end of the rod here. Now the jam nut I also turned in slightly so that it would give me just a little bit more end room. And really there's no more adjustment. I'm not going to cut off any more threads or shorten this thing up. But now that I have a length that I'm happy with, and I've mocked it up and checked the pedal, everything works. Now I'm going to tighten up that jam nut against this part, however you want to call this part, and then I'll put the booster back in. Make sure you put that rubber boot on. I'll put the booster back in, and I'll try to show you what the pedal looks like in relation to the floor pan and or the gas pedal. Okay, so once again, there's the booster installed. The master cylinder is just loosely bolted to it, but I do have my clearance, and I don't know if I can show you very much, but the pedal in relation to the gas pedal, the brake pedal may be just a little bit high, but I don't have much choice based on the problems I had with the system. And the gas pedal may be sitting a little bit low too because it's not connected to anything. It's just sitting in there. The rubber gasket to the firewall is what's keeping it in a kind of a neutral position. So anyway, I'm pretty happy with it. After the struggle of trying to make things fit, you know, this is better than me spending more money. And hopefully y'all don't have the same problem. But this is how I fixed it. You're welcome to try it if you need to. It's up to you. At this point, I'm probably going to end this video because of the complexity of getting the combination valve in here. I haven't figured that out yet. I don't want to drag this out very much longer, and you know, your system may vary, so it may not be very beneficial. But I may do another video showing that combination valve or proportioning valve installed, and I'm not going to waste your time on this. But anyway, I'm pretty happy with this. Again, this is a CSRP brake, booster, and master cylinder, and hopefully I can get some more progress done on this car. I'd like to have it a lot further along than it is, but certain things slow you down. So that's it for now, and again, thanks for watching.